Welcome to PetroNoia, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the energy debate. Hosted by Dan Romito, this show takes complex energy issues, strips away the agendas, and delivers clear fact-based insights. Whether you're an industry expert or simply looking for a balanced perspective, PetroNoia brings clarity to the conversation. Each episode, Dan breaks down key topics, from U.S. energy independence to global policy impacts, focusing on the facts rather than the rhetoric, helping listeners make sense of the energy landscape. This is PetroNoia, where we separate fact from fiction to fuel-informed discussions.
Welcome to PetroNoia. I'm here with what has come to be a very good friend and almost a mentor. Not almost, I guess, a mentor, Drew Bond. I don't know why I said almost. He's the co-founder and chairman of a group called C3, but also the CEO of a company called PowerField Energy. And one of the things that I've gotten to know about Drew is just his very pragmatic approach to, virtually everything, but especially to the energy debate. So Drew, thank you so much for coming on. Before we kind of dive right into everything, you have a fantastic and a remarkable and very impressive background. Can you take a couple minutes just to kind of highlight to the audience like how you got here?
Wow, Dan, thanks for that intro. I don't know how I'm going to live up to those expectations, but if anybody's mentoring anybody, I don't know, maybe it's mutual. So
I won't go that far.
Appreciate all you guys do, all you do. I've been blessed. I've got a great background. I started out not knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up, and been figuring it out as I've gone along. I had the opportunity first to work for Senator Don Nichols from Oklahoma on Capitol Hill, and so then had a chance to really open my aperture to the world of policy and how that impacts business, and really work with a solid just leader and human being. Nichols was one of the best bosses I ever had, and then went to Oklahoma and was chief of staff for Denise Bodie, and she helped me cut my teeth on energy. And so we were at the Corporation Commission. She was a commissioner, and I was her chief of staff. And in Oklahoma, the Corporation Commission manages all the public utilities policy, but also all the oil and gas policy. So really a good lens to understand energy. And Denise was an awesome boss and just very much a go-getter. And then took a little bit of a sabbatical from policy, went into sales. Decided, to come back to DC. I don't mind sales. I just really need to believe in what I'm selling. And
right.
I had the opportunity to come back to DC and work at the Heritage Foundation. So I was chief of staff for Ed Fulner there, who founded and longtime president of the organization. And so again, just blessed with a great boss. Gave me a lot of opportunity to grow in that position and help the organization grow. And then had a chance to become CEO of my first startup called townhall.com, and then that was bought by a publicly traded company. Went into a little bit of home building for about a year while the market decided to crash, and then came back to DC and had an opportunity to work for George W. Bush in the U.S. Department of Energy. And so it's really, since then, the 2007, for those 2 years at the DOE, and then 7 years at Battelle as a vice president for technology commercialization, and then several startups since then. That I've been in the energy space, the so-called clean tech space, really since then. And what I loved about energy then and what I love about energy now is it's so ever changing. It's dynamic, and energy is not one thing. Energy is many, many things, and it's electricity, it's molecules, it's hardware, it's software, and so just an incredible opportunity to build a career. So I wish I had grown up and woken up from high school one day and said I want to be in energy, because I maybe would have made even more fast progress, but I'm happy to be where I am.
Yeah, maybe it's the entrepreneurial spirit, right? You have this entrepreneurial spirit where some people may look at some of your comments and think you're just going against the grain for the sake of going against the grain. But one of the quotes that you've really coined was, "There's a million reasons to be optimistic about energy, right? In a world where constant pessimism is entering the space, and particularly with data centers and the tech bros, and how are we going to fuel and power all this stuff? You're talking about the eternal optimism in the space. When you're talking about the optimism, what specifically are you alluding to?
Yeah, I am alluding to the fact that there are countless numbers of companies and new technologies being born every day that are growing and pivoting, all to solve real challenges, real problems, and creating real opportunities to make life better for people around the world, and all energy related. So, when I think about some interesting opportunities, it's like, all right, well, just some specific examples that kind of come to mind, right? I've got a solar company called PowerField Energy. We were founded on this principle of being simple and really driving down the costs of energy. That is now becoming even more important as data centers come on the scene. They need more energy. They're power hungry. They need it fast. How do you get that there delivered, quickly? But that's just, solar is just a part of the picture. It's not all the picture by any stretch. There's a company called Lilac Solutions based out of Silicon Valley. They are doing what's called direct lithium extraction. And so, we need lithium for batteries and other things, but mainly batteries. Lithium has a bit of a negative reputation for needing a lot of water. That's usually because you bring lithium to the surface, you put it in a pool of water and let it evaporate, and then you end up with the material that you need. You can actually extract it downhole, much like we do with natural gas, thanks to the fracking technology that we've developed. So you can do that without the need for all that water, right? So and that becomes more and more economic as the demand in the market becomes greater. So that's one example. I mean, there's another example. We've got a company we're working with called Noon Energy out of Silicon Valley. They're containerized battery systems, highly efficient. They don't need rare earths, very modular. So those types of solutions, everything to think about the fracking revolution that unlocked American energy and really global, energy. That was all born by an entrepreneur out of Texas named George Mitchell. And, he was persistent in his belief that, the ability to go downhole farther and get to deeper resources, broader, was going to be important for the future. At the time, I remember being in Oklahoma at the time, and oil was like $10-12 a barrel. And we were kind of scratching our heads wondering, like, how's it going to work economically? Right. You fast forward and oil goes up to $140-50 a barrel. And they made the technology work, the market timing was right, and it flipped the script on the entire energy scenario here in the U.S. where, we were relying on the Middle East for our oil, and now suddenly we're exporting energy to the world. So, I could go on and on and on and on. There are literally a million, if not more, reasons to be pretty, optimistic about this space.
No, it's a really good point. And one of the other things that you talk about extensively is, the notion of free market principles, right? There's a lot of environmental groups, and God bless them, right? And the ones that are well-intentioned, I think sometimes forget that, hey, at the end of the day, there's an economic dynamic that we just can't forget about, and we certainly can't ignore. When you're talking about C3 and a lot of the work that y'all put out, you do a very good job, I think, on purpose, I'm saying going overboard, but I'm saying it in a positive way, of stressing the importance of maintaining free market principles and how free markets solve problems. Do you think that's one of the primary differences between what a C3 focuses on and sort of what I'm going to say legacy or traditional environmental NGO? Because you're not an environmental NGO, but I could see how people would conflate the two. Like, how is that sort of the differentiating feature? Is your emphasis of how the importance of free markets is something that we absolutely have to prioritize?
Yeah, I think that's key. That is our founding principle, is that free economies are clean economies. And, we've written this report now 4 times that shows how economic freedom leads to a cleaner environment, and leads to like a cleaner environment times 2, right? I mean, so economic freedom and all the elements that make up economic freedom are really good for people and really good for the planet. And the opposite of that is the lack of economic freedom. And so that is called socialism. That is called, in its most extreme, communism and dictatorships. And so you can look geopolitically around the world right now on locations that are best for the environment. Those are countries with strong, vibrant democracies that care about the rule of law, that have a strong work and competition ethic, that have governments that do what they're supposed to do and don't meddle in business too much. And so the regulations should work for the regulations' intent and not beyond that. And so you can look at all these different things, tax rates, lower tax rates, those all accrue to more innovation, more competition, more energy that's more abundant, more affordable, more reliable. And so, when we founded the organization, we really wanted to flip the script on the climate, which is why we have climate in our name. Because, back 2020 and prior to that, you couldn't go anywhere talking about anything and the climate would come up. It's like you're at the grocery store and people want to know how this can of beans is going to impact the climate. And so what we said was, look, no matter what you believe about the climate and how much it is changing based on human activity, no matter what, I think we all agree that we want to leave this place better than we found it. We want to pollute less. We want to emit, toxins in the air less. We want to leave this place in a much better environmental kind of place for our children and grandchildren. And we know that what results in the best results is actually having people have abundant, affordable, reliable energy. And there's almost an inherent drive towards that being cleaner and cleaner over time, because as people and economies become more wealthy and prosperous, they actually have I hate to say it, but it's a luxury. They have the luxury of being able to care about the environment. If your first thought of every day is how am I going to protect my family from being kidnapped, or being literally by drug lords or whatever, pick your reason, then you're not worried about the environment, right? Or if your first thought is you're living in a third world country and your whole day is filled with finding wood for a fire so that you can cook to feed your family, you're not worried about the environment. We've got to help people get to real solutions, and the environmentalists for so long have been this kind of extreme view, the Greta Thunbergs of the world, right? It's like, we've got to keep all fossil fuels in the ground today, and every day that goes by that fossil fuels aren't in the ground is just increasing the threat for global doom and demise, right? And you look at the history and the facts, and it's actually the opposite. I mean, energy has enabled people to live longer, thanks to the energy enabling medicine and people being able to, heat and cool their homes and things like that. So, to be practical about solving for the climate to the extent that we humans impact it, well, all right, let's do that with real solutions. And saying that we're going to keep all the fossil fuels in the ground is not a real solution. Or, I was with a group the other day, and there's a group out there that believes that we ought to get to a point where there's zero plastics in the world. Well, good luck with that.
I hope that person never goes to the hospital.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's just the sort of mind-boggling. I mean, this fantasy world that some environmentalists live in.
Yeah.
But as you noted in this kind of question, it's not all environmentalists, right? I mean, there are well-intended environmentalists who truly care about the environment. We come at this from different perspectives. They would prefer a top-down approach. I prefer a bottom-up approach.
Right.
Our government is a democracy where we often meet in the middle. And so let's make sure that when we implement laws, that they do what they're supposed to do and don't get out of bounds and create actually unintended consequences.
Yeah, I mean, even the lesser extreme, right? I know you're giving the extreme, but the lesser extreme would be, if you talk to someone on the south side of Chicago, right, the single mom with 3 kids just trying to make ends meet, and you're going to hassle her about her carbon footprint, she's going to be like, what?
Yeah.
But then you go to the boarding school in the Northeast and you ask, a 17-year-old, like their carbon footprint, they could probably do the calculations right in front of you. Like they know that, like that, the notion of luxury, I believe is, and this is not anything earth shattering, is highly correlated to income bracket, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense that, if you're going to put in policies that disproportionately impact those who can least afford it, like you're not really doing anything. You're not really bettering anything. And to your point on top down, like, do you think the vast majority of the general public prefers top down? And if you do, like, why is that? Like, government doesn't really solve, or doesn't necessarily have a track record of solving like a variety of problems, yet we defer to them. Oh, the government should solve this.
Yeah. I mean, well, I'll say there's an alarming rate of increased thinking. I saw a poll recently, and I wrote an op-ed about this, where there was a poll after the election of Mamdani in New York around how many people actually believe that socialism is a good thing. And that was actually a scary number. It was like in the high, 70s, 80s or something like that.
Right. It was very generational as well.
Yeah, very generational, younger people. And, and that tracks somewhat with history. I mean, young people tend to be more liberal, and then they start paying taxes, and then they get more conservative, and you have a family, and your principles, kind of your view of the world changes. But this idea that top down, is the best thing that could help us it does boggle my mind, because historically socialism has truly wrecked people's lives, wrecked generations, wrecked economies, wrecked countries, and and then you want to just use an example in the energy space, so not socialism but just a top-down approach. Well, for the longest time, right, the environmentalists prevented us in the United States from being able to not only build new coal-fired power plants, but even upgrade the existing coal-fired power plant.
Right.
So the impact on that was that the existing coal-fired power plants became less and less efficient. Therefore, they became more and more polluting.
Yeah.
Which, if we had instead made those coal-fired power plants more efficient, they would have been less polluting. And not to say that we need to bet on coal forever, but until there's a better alternative, then let's make what we've got the most efficient possible. And and the same is for nuclear power. I mean, if you really want to solve for climate, and you believe that we need energy, then we need that's key. Let's agree on those two things. So if you really want to solve climate, and you really believe we need energy, then the most carbon efficient, climate friendly technology energy source is nuclear energy. Well, who has opposed nuclear energy for the longest time, right? It's the environmentalists.
Right.
And so now,
which is the most mind-boggling thing in the world to me. Like, to your point too, they're like, do y'all like lights? And they're like, yes. Do you like emissions? And they're like, no. Like, well, nuclear solves both those. And they're like, yeah, I don't like that. I don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, there was obviously some concern around the safety, although even though historically nuclear is the safest, has killed the least number of people of all the technologies, but it makes for a good movie.
Good HBO series.
Yeah. And I think there's but that's where I go back to optimism and the innovation, because now we see this push of companies innovating around the nuclear space. We really are seeing a nuclear renaissance. You've got almost 100 companies with various technologies innovating around making nuclear more small, more modular, more cost efficient to manufacture, easier to distribute. The timing of that actually works well with these data centers as they bring on new energy demand. And then even layer on top of that some of the new technologies that allow nuclear to be even safer, even though it already was the safest in the world. Now, if something goes wrong, well, the worst thing that can happen is it shuts down.
Right.
There's these types of things that capital, entrepreneurship, innovation, all of those things drive solving real problems. And back to your question about environmentalists and climate. Well, if climate's a real problem, like let's go solve for that through innovation, through technology, through capital markets, not through government, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, with nuclear in particular, this goes back to competitiveness. I think there's this competitive dynamic where, I call it the next prowess of economic dominance really does come from, to what extent can we efficiently implement, generative AI within the economy? And, you alluded to it earlier with the data centers. But, if you're not going to be able to power these things, competitiveness is thrown right outside the door. In your opinion, what are some of the major culprits that are holding, let's take nuclear, for example, like holding nuclear back from just sort of maybe exploding is the wrong term, but from being
taking off.
Yeah, taking off. Like, let's just go with that one. What is it permitting? Is it just policy? Like what's holding it back?
Yeah, I mean, it really is permitting. It's permitting more than anything else. When you look at how long it takes to permit anything in the United States, the average time is somewhere between 4 and 7 years, depending on the technology. Average time for a new nuclear plant is going to be 10 years to 100 plus. Like never in your lifetime.
Right.
And so, when I think about like, what does it take to have a successful company? Well, you need a successful like a good technology. You need a good team. You need good access to capital. We have so many of those ingredients in the nuclear space right now. You need lastly, good policy. And it's the policy that's really hindered our ability to scale many of these technologies. That is, there's obviously a big drive to change that under this current Trump administration, and that I think is probably couldn't be better timing. I mean, I hope and honestly pray that the Trump administration, this Congress, in a bipartisan fashion, can implement some serious permitting reform, because if not, we're not going to be able to build fast enough in the United States, and we are going to lose the competition to China.
Is the permitting, like, so taking a little bit of a deeper dive in permitting, because that's not necessarily like my expertise, is it a couple people holding it up, or they can't agree to terms, or like what is the big thing holding up permitting reform? Like, why can't they just get it done?
Yeah, I think there's different views about what permitting reform really should mean. Is one thing. I mean, and keep in mind that we have a federal system, right? So meaning we have a federal permitting, we have state permitting, we have local counties and cities permitting, depending on what we're talking about. But at the federal level, I think in the past it's been the Democrats wanted to allow for fast track permitting for renewables. The Republicans wanted to allow for fast track permitting for fossil fuels, and never could they meet in the middle. I think now we're going to have to meet in the middle. We need to be able to do all of these things, and so I think that is part of it. I think the other is politics. No, not one party wants to allow the other party to have a big win, and so, you've got a bunch of Democrats in Congress that don't want the president to cut a ribbon on permitting reform, and then there's a bit of the perfect is the enemy of the good in legislating, and so they're trying to get through what they can get through. It's never going to be perfect, and so ideally, from my perspective, the best kind of permitting reform is technology neutral, and frankly, it goes back to some of the very first principles of the earliest laws that existed, like NEPA. If you talk permitting reform, it's hard to not talk about NEPA. NEPA was the environmental law that was passed in 1970. That law hasn't changed since then. Only that there's been piles upon piles upon piles of regulation and legal opinions and actions that have layered additional bureaucracy on top of that. And so here's the thing: like, if you want to go build a power plant, if you want to build a solar power plant, you want to build a nuclear power plant, you want to build a pipeline, you're eventually going to run across some kind of federal land. some connection to federal property. And we're not talking national parks here. I'm just talking about like wide open federal lands, right?
Right.
And then you're going to have to go through this whole NEPA process. And the NEPA process was originally designed so that if you had a new project and we've never seen this before and we don't know what the environmental impact is going to be, well, we better make sure we know before we build that thing, right? Well, fast forward to today. Give me one technology that we haven't already built or already assessed in some way environmentally, or already know the various technology implications of. And yet you still have to go get a permit to do that. All while you have to abide by the other laws. You have to abide by the Clean Water Act. You have to abide by the Clean Air Act, right? So it's as if like when you go build a building, if you're a contractor, big contractor, you build a big commercial building, you have to abide by the health and safety laws to protect your workers, right?
Right.
You just have to abide by those laws. You don't have to go anywhere to get a permit to ask permission to then abide by the law. Right?
You're asking permission to abide by the law. Yeah, exactly. You just abide by the law.
So literally what NEPA now is requiring project developers and construction companies to do is to get a permit to then abide by the law. So this is where, like, in my opinion, I think, NEPA needs to go back to its very first rendition of language and get rid of all the other regulations that have come along with it. And say, all right, if we come up with some new widget that we've never seen before that generates electricity or generates energy, and we've never seen the environmental impact, we have no idea what that is, and maybe it literally comes from Mars, right? Okay, let's do a NEPA on that. But if I want to build a solar farm or a wind farm, a nuclear power plant, or a pipeline, or you name it, like, I ought to be able to just simply, as long as I've got my land permits, meaning I've got it zoned properly, which we still have zoning processes where you have to get buy-in from the community, and then you have to then go abide by the laws. I'm not going to pollute the water, I'm not going to pollute the air, and I'm not going to kill people while I build it, right? And so,
pretty fair.
Yeah. So that it's like this is the world we live in. All the while, China, right?
Yeah.
China is building faster than we can imagine, and and this is where back to one of your questions about top down versus bottom up. I've been in meetings where some people on the left, Democrats, liberals, have used the China being able to build fast example as reason why we should actually have more of a China-like government. And I'm like, that's the last thing we need, right? We don't need more top-down like dictatorship. Yeah. What we need is the government to get out of the way so that then we can beat China.
The thing that it's actually a good point. You triggered me because like when Qatar, built their stadium for, I think it was like the World Cup, right? Your people marveled at like the size of the stadium, the speed that it was built, how amazing that it looked, like all the bells and the whistles. And then you took a step back and you're like, I think like 25,000 workers died, like making that. It's some outrageous number. I don't know if 25,000 is it, but it's not like 2 or 3. Like it's a ridiculous amount. And then I equate that to China. It's like they put up stuff really, really quick, but there's no attention to health and safety. Like you see all the mishaps that would be crucified in the United States. So someone in the U.S. arguing that we should adopt more China, like it's so hypocritical because it goes against the very things that they probably promote in the first place. And one of the other things that sort of drives me crazy is I think the tech bros get like this pass, right? And I don't necessarily understand why. Like, once again, energy, historically speaking, the participants, some of them have not been angels. I would argue the vast majority of them have actually done a pretty good job, but there's, some bad actors that have taken place.
Yep.
But now you have this sort of developing rift between like the tech bros and the farmers that is actually getting a lot more attention, but for, the last 5 years didn't really necessarily get the attention that it probably should. You have an interesting take on farmers. In fact, you call them sort of like the OGs, the first environmentalists, right? Um, do you think they're being disproportionately, I don't want to say ignored, but they don't have necessarily the same voice as the tech community or some of the other environmentalists?
Yeah, I think for the longest time they were certainly left out of the environmental discussion, and frankly, they wanted to be left out of the environmental discussion because the environmental discussion was so driven by the left. But to your point, I mean, I don't know that I can take credit for coining it, but I mean, they really are the first environmentalists. And, farmers know better than anyone about how to steward the land. I think from a data center AI perspective, clearly there's a big economic opportunity here, and farmers and ranchers know how to maximize the economics of their land, whether it's below the land or on top of the land. Whether it's cattle or solar farms, wind farms, or everything in between. I think what I'm hoping is that farmers and ranchers are going to be included more in the policy discussion around things like as we build out the energy needed for data centers. In the policy world, traditionally farmers are thought about once in a while when we have a farm bill, and that's more about farming and more about growing food and crops. It's about energy, but now suddenly you've got those two worlds that have intersect, and we need we need as much energy as we can get. Excuse me, as fast as we can get it, and these data centers take up a fair amount of land. So where are we going to go to that land? It's the rural areas, it's farmers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting statistics is if you look at since 1920, just how much the farmland in the U.S. has dwindled, but the output has expanded almost exponentially. Probably because of natural gas and its impact and its reliance or its dependence on fertilizer, or how fertilizer is dependent on that.
That's it.
But now data centers take up, to your point, like there's data centers in Ohio that are literally the size of Manhattan. Do you think that farmers, or do you observe farmers or the agricultural industry is getting more involved in that discussion, or is there work to be done on their end to kind of get more integrated within the debate?
I mean, I think there's always work to be done. I think you mentioned the tech bros, I think in the beginning they were just going fast as possible and, gobbling up land where they could get it and building as fast as they could do it. I think, now they're getting a lot of pushback and pressure from the communities around, hey, you promised us jobs, where are the jobs? These data centers require a lot of cooling. You need water to cool. Where is that water going to come from? You've got some kind of political wars in the West over water. There's some real tensions to be had there. I also think that though we've got these mega campus data centers that we traditionally think about. I think that will evolve to become also some micro data centers around.
Okay.
So just like we saw with the build out of power plants, we saw big power plants, and then eventually that sort of drive towards more distributed layers on top of that. I think we're going to see big data centers with more distributed layers on top of that.
Interesting. Do you see that going in place or taking place right now, or are those conversations like where are we at in that evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now what I'm seeing and hearing is there's a desire, to get as much energy as fast as possible wherever we can get it, and grid connected or not grid connected, for those data centers. It's going to come down to the economics of that and the scale, and so many cases with a big macro data center like use the Fermi one up in the Panhandle of Texas.
Yeah,
right? I mean, you got Rick Perry's group. They're building this massive off-grid data center that's going to be powered by small modular nuclear reactors and solar and geothermal and wind. It's like going to be an all the above and below, like mega city essentially. There's that sort of model. But then you've got these, if you think about solar and batteries as being the other thing that you can deploy very quickly, solar, we've got plenty of solar panels. That's not a big issue. Batteries are coming at scale. But many of the batteries are actually these sort of shipping container size modular type systems. And so the ability to co-locate energy with smaller to medium-sized data centers, I think is going to be a big opportunity. And again, it kind of goes all back to like, is it off-grid? Is it on-grid? If it's on-grid, where's your grid connection? And then how much land do you need for that? And it's a whole lot easier to get a 160 acre plot of land than it is to get a 6,000 acre plot of land.
Right. I mean, the other thing too, you guys do a really good job of touching upon, and you were sort of alluding to it. I mean, and culturally, you have rural America, like where you're going to find vast amount of open land, like rural America. Rural America tends to be much more right of center than left of center. And then you have the tech boroughs, which are predominantly Silicon Valley, and there's other places, but that's sort of like the epicenter, if you will, and that's left of center. It's not necessarily just this technology race; it's this culture race. But we discussed sort of what we've seen from the left. Like, are there elements on the right side of the political aisle that are misunderstanding or could do a better job of just interpreting things differently?
Is your question related to the cost of energy, or is it related to like data centers?
Just any of the above. Just any of the above. Because once again, like we talk about these things, and like I feel like I'm crazy. Like, this is pretty simple math. It's like, okay, do we need more energy? Yes. Okay, where are we going to get that? Well, okay, we really have like 3 or 4 options. We have coal, we have natural gas, we have nuclear, and I guess there's 4. There's like renewables. Okay, great.
Yeah.
What does each of them cost? What's the reliability? How do we get it from point A to point B? And once again, if you're just doing a spreadsheet exercise, it's natural gas. So it's not like this theoretical like exercise that we have to go through, like this brain buster.
Yeah.
But everyone typically right of center is like, no, natural gas and nuclear, and let's move on to the next. And everyone left of center is like renewables, like everything has to be renewables. And I'm generalizing, of course, but like, am I really making it that simple? Like, are people right of center not taking into account something that we probably should? Or, I mean, the answer could be no.
I mean, I think it all depends on who you're talking to and what technology you're talking about. I mean, I often find that like my solar company, for instance, some folks just hate solar, and honestly, like,
it's also weird.
It's okay. Yeah. Like, I kind of get it. I mean, like, it's if the mantra from the solar industry and the left, which it's been for a while, has been like, we could be 100% solar in the U.S. Well, no, we can't. And I have a solar company. I'm pro solar, but let's use solar where it makes sense, where the sun is shining. Let's also recognize that right now most of it is made in China. And so do we really want to be 100% reliant on China for our energy? I don't think so.
Right.
And so, to me, it's like, all right, well, solar, can make a lot of sense. And we've got some systems with farmers that, it's in the corner of that center pivot where they've got a big sprinkler system, right? And you put a small solar farm there. It's powering your sprinkler when the sun's shining. You're using land that you're not farming. Like, why not do that?
Right.
Are you doing it to save the earth and the climate? Probably not. But, like, it's just a good decision.
Right. It's just good economics.
Yeah. So there's things like that. I mean, the same for, wind and offshore wind. I know wind and offshore wind has gotten a lot of flack under this administration. President Trump hates it. I get why he hates it, because he's had to look at it off the coast of his hotel resorts, right?
Right.
And so, am I sitting on the beach? Do I want to see a wind farm? No. But if it's off the coast of Louisiana where I can't see it, and it's co-located with some, oil, rigs, like, do I care? No. Like, if there's a business that can make that economical and they can deliver power and someone will buy it, like, more power to them, literally, pun intended. So, that's where I think these debates get lost, because it's like, literally, I want to be all the above and below, technology neutral as possible, get rid of the subsidies, Mature technologies don't need subsidies.
Right.
And, and that's where, like in the solar industry, finally the solar subsidies are going to be expiring. And, the solar industry was freaking out. And there'll be some changes for sure. And some businesses will have to pivot or they'll go out of business. But solar has already been able to get to a point where it's one of the lowest cost forms of energy. And so, so if it's the lowest cost form of energy, why are we subsidizing it?
Right.
And
do you think that nuclear needs a subsidy? Right. I've heard the argument, and it's actually makes a lot of sense. It's for any large institutional investor, the amount of capital required is substantial. Right. They would be leveraging a good portion or significant percentage of their balance sheet, and the payback is 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So just purely from a risk management perspective, if I said, hey, I need $10 billion. Okay, great. When am I going to get paid back? You're like, maybe a quarter of a century. You'd be like, maybe I could spend that somewhere else more efficiently. With that context being the argument, do you think that nuclear requires a subsidy?
So this is where I go back to like first principles on the policy. If we got the policy right, if we change the picture, if we fix the regulations so that you could permit nuclear power faster in the United States, the capital is already being invested in this. Capital will be invested even more if you can tell me instead of taking 10 years to get something permitted, I can get it permitted in 1 year. So that would be my first recommendation is before we start subsidizing anything, let's look at what is the cost of regulations and are they actually having an unintended consequence. Then I look at, has the technology been proven at scale and does the market consider it bankable? And there's a point at which, a nuclear power plant or a new anything power plant, if it's first of a kind, it's still seen as risky to the banks and the investors, right? If it's second, third of a kind, less risk, but still risky. Once you get to like third of a kind and it's been operational, now you've de-risked the technology and it's all about how do you perform in the market? How do you execute on business? And so, I can get on board with providing support and subsidies for first of a kind till like, third of a kind technologies. But beyond that, at that point you either need to execute or you're not, you don't have the right kind of product market fit, timing market fit.
And some of those things you outlined, I'll promote it for you, the candidate briefing book, right? Can you just highlight the intent of that and sort of like maybe the three takeaways? I know you alluded to some of it just now on the subsidy perspective, but, tell me more or inform the audience more about this candidate briefing book.
Yeah. So C3 Solutions, we educate policymakers and try to help them make better decisions on all things climate, energy, and the environment. The candidate briefing book was intended to educate soon to be our next policy, leaders. And so anyone running for Congress, anyone running for president, anyone running for, frankly, their, local city council, there's policy recommendations in there related to energy that are relevant. And it's everything from, how do we get the permitting reform right to, how do you better understand the various technologies and the policies and those and the frameworks they need. And so, there's a 10-chapter playbook. It's very long. It's like, 160 pages or something. But there's, for every chapter, there's 2-page summaries. So we know people are busy and you've got to be able to digest it quickly. And so I would recommend.
You can also use ChatGPT, right?
There you go. Yeah. So, put that thing in ChatGPT and tell it to give you a one-pager on that. But that in many ways, that book is timeless because it starts with what are the principles, what are the policies that follow from those principles, and then what are the various pieces of legislation that were out in existence at that time that we saw that made sense.
It's also forward looking, right? I mean, just it implied to me when I was reviewing my ChatGPT notes, I didn't read all 10 chapters, I fully admitted. I did the summary part, but it's not like, I think one of the things that distinguishes it from a lot of the other things, not to pick on the environmental NGOs, but I will anyway. It's like they want it tomorrow, right? They do a very poor job of acknowledging that, first of all, change is really difficult. Second of all, change takes somewhat of a long time. It takes longer than it does shorter time. Yeah. But also just establishing realistic expectations. Like the expectations that are established in that guidebook, if you will, look very much like what the world will look like in 2035, 2040, right? It is very long-term focused.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. I mean, that was definitely the intent is, you could change out the pieces of legislation that are referenced in there, but everything else is pretty much going to stay the same. Now, honestly, if you fast forward to 2040, 2050, I hope that some of those chapters will be irrelevant because we've now accomplished them.
We solved those problems.
So, I mean, the chapter on nuclear energy, like if we could solve the permitting, the technology and capital is there that will scale, and we can look back and say, okay, chapter achieved, check, right? Pipelines, pipelines are good for the environment. They stop, they prevent a bunch of, diesel trucks from going up and down the road. Why don't we have more pipelines? Technology neutral tax policy that's not distorting markets and picking winners and losers, tipping the scale. This administration hates wind, the next administration loves wind. Like, how about we just allow these technologies to compete? So those are the types of things that I hope we look back and say, okay, we're out of content. We've achieved all these things.
Yeah. We did this, and then you'll be retired you will both be retired hopefully by 2040. I'm not doing this in 2040. The inflection point, right? Do you think we are experiencing it now? Like I've heard two schools of thought of like, hey, we are in this drastic inflection point, and it's a little bit doom and gloom where like if we don't get our act together, then we are going to be at the point of no return, and then that's sort of like the demise of the United States. And then there's other people I've spoken to. They're like, no, like we're close, but there was something that will take place where we'll get everything in line. And unfortunately, most of the time, it's like something cataclysmic or something a negative event, not necessarily a positive. But do you think we've hit that inflection point, or are we approaching it? Like where are we at?
And when you say inflection point, you mean on the climate and the temperature? Or
climate, energy policy, everything sort of adjacent to that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the inflection point I worry about most is the inflection point related to China. From a climate perspective, I think we've now surpassed the number of carbon molecules in the atmosphere that result in X temperature. But that's still, while it's gone beyond whatever that point is, I think it's 1.2 degrees C or something. Mm-hmm. It's still less than what was earlier predicted, and so a lot of the catastrophic things just frankly haven't come true. And so much of that I feel like is also out of our control. I mean, you can control what you can control, and so again, I want to reduce my footprint environmentally on the world, but I also want to make sure that I enable people to have the most prosperous lives possible globally. So I think that's one tipping point. There's all kinds of scientific arguments about what's going to happen when we reach whatever degrees. I'm frankly more concerned about the tipping point that we've got related to China. I mean, we have gone from being dependent on the Middle East for our oil to being dependent on China for our minerals and mining. And so the fact that we get 80 to 90% of our minerals that we need for all kinds of things to live in a modern society, that we're so reliant on China, not only for those minerals, but to process those minerals. We've offshored all of that. Now, this administration, the Trump administration, is trying to fix that. They're trying to re-onshore some of that stuff. They're permitting, mines and other things like crazy. That's all good news, but these things take time to build. And so, China has had a 5-year strategic plan for the last like 25 years or something. And this isn't actually new news. They've broadcast it to the world that, hey, here's our plan. And they've been methodical about it. And we've been ignoring it and thinking that they were just going to make cheap, Chinese toys and clothes for us for the rest of the, time. And now we're suddenly reliant on them for like some serious, materials and equipment and manufacturing that if we don't get that back, then we're not in a good position geopolitically.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you wholeheartedly, right? I do think it's China, like it's the China. Like I fell out of my chair, when COVID hit and, all these stories came out about how the supply chain related to healthcare, like our pharmaceuticals and all our medical equipment was, I think, 90% produced in China. And, the cynic in you, but I also think it's a realistic scenario. Like they can cut the switch off whenever they want. And, they have this tendency also to play chess. And, unfortunately for the last decade or so, American politics has been very consumed with playing checkers.
Yeah.
Well, man, this has been great. I can't believe it's the hour.
Yeah. Where'd the time go?
In terms of just finding out more about C3 and what you're working on, can you give sort of the commercial, like where do they find your stuff? How do they get in touch with you? Like, where's everything located?
Yeah, please. It's easy. c3solutions.org is our website. And there you'll find everything about our organization. There's also a link there to an online news magazine that we help promote. That's called c3newsmag.com. And that news magazine is actually intended to kind of be a bigger tent of all innovation and more of a positive solving perspective view of climate, energy, and the environment. And so we're always, for one, I'll just say we're always looking for content. So if anyone's out there that wants to become a writer, wants to hone their writing skills, or have specific op-eds and research, podcasts like this, we look for content to promote. So. C3solutions.org, you'll find all of our research there, and the newsmag.com, you'll find more about just the broader free market energy and climate world.
That's awesome. Drew, man, thank you so much for the time. I know that we'll be having you on the show again, but wishing you the best holiday, and we'll be talking soon.